into. So we're going to talk a little bit about resource adequacy as it comes to generation, what that means for LES. And I'm going to hand off to Emily Koenig, and she's going to come up and talk about the rate impacts, okay? So we're a member of the Southwest Power Pool. We're going to do this the opposite way. Raise your hand if you don't know who the Southwest Power Pool is. All right. We're pretty good. Emeka, the CEO, he didn't raise his hand, so that's a good sign. All right. Southwest Power Pool, regional electricity organization, competitive electricity market, northern Texas, Canadian border with Nebraska all the way up. So the Southwest Power Pool, they have rules for how much generation members like LES has to have. And it's pretty simple. It's a long rule book, but it boils down to something pretty simple. You've got to have enough accredited capacity. That's the generating capacity you can count on at the time of your peak load, plus an extra reserve margin. All right, so you got to have enough capacity to meet your peak load plus an extra reserve margin, a buffer. And the idea is if everybody has that buffer, then when there's problems with generating resources, what happened during Winter Storm Uri doesn't happen anymore. All right, pretty simple. Well, last year they added a bunch of new rules to that. Okay. We're just going to surface skim these. If you look at them in a book, there's a lot of words there, a lot of pages. This is high level. So the first thing they call effective load carrying capability, or ELCC. That is the credit they're going to give to what they call your non-dispatchable resources. And non-dispatchable is things you're not in complete control of. So that's wind and solar, because Mother Nature runs those, you don't. And batteries. You can run a battery, you decide when to charge it, you decide more importantly when to discharge it, but you only control it for a little bit of time because it runs out of battery juice, all right? So with this ELCC, and SPP is not the only people to use this, it's kind of used across the country. What they say is the more of one of these non-dispatchable resources we get, the less juice we get for the squeeze. And the example is solar. Everybody's probably familiar with solar out in California. Long time ago, the first person to put in solar, it was the greatest thing ever. So like, hey, this generating resource requires no fuel and it's at its maximum output pretty close about the time of our peak load, late afternoon, early evening. Well, now fast forward and they've got so much solar there that their peak load doesn't occur when the sun's up anymore. It's when all the solar turns off and it happens at night. So if you told California, good news, I'm going to come build some solar, they'd say, well, we'll take it, but we prefer you bring something else because we really don't need that much more. That's kind of inherently how this works. So you got a bunch of curves up there, all right? Across the bottom, that is the amount of each type of resource that's installed in all of SPP, not just us, everybody, okay? And that's in megawatts. On the vertical axis, the y-axis, that's the percentage that you get to count towards that having enough capacity to meet your peak load plus that extra buffer, that reserve margin. So you've got three sets of curves there, both a summer and a winter. I will tell you the blue, that is battery, okay? The solid line summer, dashed line's winter, if you can make that out. The yellow solar, and then the green's the wind. I want you to look at the solar. I'm going to give you an example of how this works. We're looking at the solid line. That's the summer rating. If you said, what if I have 20,000 megawatts of solar in all of SPP combined? Well, you just go over to 20,000 megawatts. You go up until you hit the yellow line. And then you say, what percentage is that? And it should be, yep, 40%. What that means is if you put in 100 megawatts of solar, something like LES, give or take, you're going to get credit for 40 megawatts of that. 40 megawatts goes towards meeting your peak load plus that extra buffer, all right? The one thing you want to notice there is look at the blue lines and the yellow lines. There's a big difference between the summer rating for a battery and solar and the winter rating for a battery and solar, all right? Solar is a great example there. In the summertime, we hit our peak load late afternoon, early evening, sun's up. It's not exactly 1 in the afternoon, but sun's up and shining, solar's producing. We have two peaks in the winter, one in the early morning, one in the late afternoon, early evening, and they're both dark. That's why in the winter, you don't get as much credit for the solar, okay? Then you've got dispatchable resources. And for LES, that's things like coal, natural gas, and hydro. We don't have any nuclear, but it'd be the same for that. What they say for those is, you know what, we're going to derate them based on when they're broken. Because if you have a dispatchable resource, like a coal resource or gas resource, hydro, you can pretty much make it do whatever it wants, except at one time, when it's broke. So what they say is we're going to go back over the last 7 years, and we're going to look at all the historical outages you've had, And then you're going to get derated based off that average. So if you have 100 megawatts of natural gas, and over the last 7 years on average, it's been broken or out of service 10% of the time, then you don't get credit for 100 megawatts, you get credit for 90, all right? Pretty similar. And then finally, this is the last big piece. It's always been since the beginning of time that we had to have enough capacity to meet our peak load plus that extra buffer in only the summer. Because if you look at LES and most of SPP, our summer load far above our winter load. If you had enough generation capacity to serve your load in the summer, you didn't even have to worry about the winter. It was a slam dunk. Winter Storm Uri changed all that, right? The region didn't do so well in the winter. So now what SPP says is we're going to monitor and measure your generating capacity in the summer and the winter. And we're going to have different reserve margins between the two. And the winter reserve margin is going to be much higher than the summer. All right. So there's your nutshell on the SPP rules. So how are we positioned? Well, first, you got to look at the resources we already have in the hopper. Okay. These are things that are not online yet, but they're coming. The first, we got a 3 megawatt battery project that's going right down the middle of downtown Lincoln. That's going to be online by the fall of this year. That sits in what we call our community microgrid, which ensures resiliency. So if we have an outage, we could get critical infrastructure down there up and running. And you think of what's critical infrastructure, the city and county state offices, Lancaster County Sheriff, LPD, state capitol, state office building, on and on, all right? We've also got almost 425 megawatts of wind capacity that we've added through a partnership with Google. Now that one's a little different than how we normally do things, so we're going to look at that real quick. Now Google's got their own sustainability goals where they've got corporate goals and directives to try to add a bunch of renewable energy. So they've got a lot of contracts and they're going to have new contracts for renewables. Well, LES, we're adding a load that could be sizable in Google. And so what do we need? Well, we need capacity to meet those SPP requirements for that additional load. So you have the opportunity for a win-win. Here's how this works. Google has a contract with a wind developer. In this example, we're using wind. And under that contract, they get all the energy that wind produces. They get all of the renewable attributes that come with that wind that basically prove officially, legally, it's renewable energy. And they get all the capacity, all right? They want the energy because it serves as a hedge against buying their load from a utility like us, because they're selling that energy in the SPP market. And they want the renewable attributes because it makes that energy officially 100% renewable. You know the piece they don't really need? The capacity, because you only need capacity if you're serving load as a utility essentially in the SPP market. That contract is exactly like all of our contracts that we have with wind developers. The new piece is that we have an agreement with Google to contract for them to buy the capacity that they don't need. It's the only piece that we really need to serve them, and it's the piece that does them no good. So this is where the win-win comes in, all right? So that's why we talk about, we added the 425 megawatts of wind capacity through Google. That's how that arrangement works. So if you take a battery, you take all that wind, you take the Google load and you put it all together, you get this. You're going to see this a lot, okay? This is what we call our load and capability chart. The green columns, that is how much generating capacity we have that SPP is giving us credit for. That's the stuff you can count on. It's all been derated, all right? The orange line, that is our peak load plus the extra reserve margin, that buffer that's required in both the summer and the winter. The top chart's the summer, bottom chart's the winter. The little orange numbers floating above the green columns, that's how much extra capacity we have, right? That's excess beyond SPP's minimum. All right, you're way back there, so it's probably not gonna work very well, but there's two things that stand out. Can anybody tell me one of them? You don't have to get both right, just one of them. And I could call on you, Lyle, because I met you just a few minutes ago. Oh, they're conferring. Do you have something? Oh, wow, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, that's a big one. You look at why the heck did we go so far from 2025 where we've got almost 200 megawatts of excess in the summer, almost close to, we'll say 250 in the winter, and then down to what's a really small number compared to that, right? Okay, that was actually the second one, but because you answered, we're gonna go out of order. You're gonna mess me up. Okay, so here's how this works. There are all kinds of moving parts between 25 and 26 because those new rules start in 2026. We have low growth between 25 and 26 because we always have some low growth, lots of things changing. But there's a smoking gun here. If you look at 25, we drop 134 megawatts from 25 to 26. In the winter, we drop 216. If you add up all the D rates of our generating capacity, both the dispatchable, which was performance-based accreditation, and the non-dispatchable, the wind, solar, and hydro, which was that ELCC, it equates to 127 megawatts in the summer. Compare 127 to 134. That's the smoking gun. And then look at the winter. The winter, our D rates are 225 and we lose 216. Again, a lot of moving parts, but there is no doubt there's only one thing behind this, and that is these new SPP rules. All right. Now, these SPP rules are not evil. When SPP makes rules, they actually make them in conjunction with all of us members. We helped. LES helped. The rules are there to ensure reliability. What happens is you say, hey, these are great rules. These are super. And then they come out and SPP starts releasing all the data and you do the math and you're like, oh, shoot, they hurt a little bit. And so that's where we're at, right? Rules are good. They're going to ensure reliability, but they do make it a little more difficult on us. The other thing is look at the excess numbers, those orange numbers in both the summer and the winter. They're almost exactly the same. Until now, we have always made generation decisions based on the summer because our summer load was much higher than the winter. All of a sudden, starting today, you say we're making generation decisions equally between the summer season and the winter season, and that is really important. All right, you'll see why here in a little bit. So if we kind of clean that up and you look at it, the one piece you have to also know is that these SPP rules and all the calculations, they do the math every single year. So they're very volatile. So what LES has said, to make sure that we're covered, we need a little extra. So anytime our excess is below 50, we probably should be adding another generating unit. We probably better have at least 50 megawatts extra all the time to make sure that from one year to the next, that when the calculations update, we don't go, oh, shoot, we're going to be short. Because when we talk about adding generation, you just don't do that overnight. This takes a few years, okay? So if you do that, our need year is 2026. That doesn't make you feel very good, right? So let's talk about how we think we're going to fix that. Here's the first one. Hydro project, 22 megawatts, that's owned and operated by the Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District. This is located out just south of Brady, Nebraska, which is pretty close to North Platte. Everybody probably knows where North Platte is. They run a canal system that kind of runs parallel to Interstate 80 out there in western Nebraska. They issued a request for proposals because they were going to sell the capacity and energy for that resource contract for it back in August. We knew by August that, hey, these new rules are out. We probably got to do something. We went after that aggressively, found out about November that we were the lead respondent, and then negotiated a contract that actually went into effect April 1st because that was their timing. All right. So those 22 megawatts, we've already got those. And that's a good deal because hydro is pretty good and they're not making a lot of new hydro. So you say, that's great. Let's add it to our chart. Well, if you add it to our chart, our need year goes from 2026 to 2028. Let me tell you, 2028 is way better than 2026, but we didn't really move the needle that far because it's only 22 megawatts. So you say, okay, we got to do something else. So what if we added 50 megawatts of aeroderivative natural gas combustion turbine? An aeroderivative turbine is, anybody recently flown in a large jet, you look out and see the engine, that is the same engine that runs this generator. They just make it to sit on the ground, and instead of flying an airplane through the air, it's turned the generator to make electricity, all right? So if we had 50 megawatts, one of those, we actually have 3 of these units already in town here. It moves our need year from 2028 with the hydro to 2032. 2032 looks a lot better. Until you realize, how long does it probably take to build one of these? Well, if we start today, we're thinking we can have it in service by 2030. Well, so if you did this plan and you added the hydro and you added one of those, that'd be great, but that means almost tomorrow you better start thinking about what you're going to do next. So one's not enough. We got to add 2. And if you add 2 with the hydro, now you're out to 2036. 2036 isn't forever, and this assumes nothing else changes in our resource portfolio, but it's got you out far enough that you can breathe and you have time to kind of look at, okay, what's the next thing we're going to do? But those aren't the only things we looked at. We also looked at solar, wind, and battery. Because in the near term, something you've got to do really fast, those are your options. You either do natural gas, you do solar, you do wind or battery. Everything else is going to take way too long. So we had to equate all those in terms of how much capacity we're going to get to meet those SPP needs. So we talked about if we add the hydro and we add the 2 gas turbines, we can get to 2036. So what we did is we added enough wind or enough solar or enough batteries to also move us to 2036 under those new SPP rules where they kind of derate them the more you put in service. That equates to 400 megawatts of wind, 400 megawatts of battery, and 1,100 megawatts of solar. I want you to look at the bottom chart, all right? On that, if you can't make it out, the yellow is the natural gas, the green is the wind, the orange is the solar, and the blue is the battery. In 2036, you'll notice we have about the same amount of capacity, the same amount of megawatts of all 4 of them. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close, okay? And you can see there, look at the blue, the battery, a lot higher to start with, right? That's because of those new ELCC rules. It's walking down, but by 2036, which is our target year, we're pretty good. Look at the summer. The wind, the battery, the natural gas, all about the same size. What's the one that's really, really tall, the orange? That's the solar. And that's what we mentioned before. You get a lot more credit for solar in the summer than you do in the winter. LES is uniquely positioned here because we already saw the way the math works out. Our summer needs and our winter needs are exactly the same. So all that excess in the summer from the solar doesn't do you any good because you also have the same need in the winter, all right? So that's how we came up with the amounts we had to add. 100 megawatts of gas or 400 megawatts of wind or 400 megawatts of battery or 1,100 megawatts of solar. Then you got to worry about, okay, what's the cost look like? So this is the cash flow. It's kind of a revenue requirement. This is how much dollars we'd have to bring in from the customers to pay for this stuff, okay? We assumed on all of this, like the gas, that's the big one that we're building and owning, we're not contracting for, that we're going to borrow for that over 20 years. Technically, we usually borrow for long-term things like that over 30 years, but we said, hey, let's assume 20, so that's the same life as the wind, solar, and battery contracts, kind of apples to apples. We also took in the year 2040 for the natural gas because it produces CO2 and we have a decarbonization goal to be net zero CO2 from our entire generation portfolio by 2040. We said, well, okay, let's add in the cost, the predicted cost in 2040 of carbon offsets. So the carbon offsets means you pay somebody to go plant trees potentially because we have a net zero goal. It doesn't mean zero. It means we get as close as we can to zero and then we offset the rest. So we threw in those dollars and we went and found a reputable projection out there in industry, and they said, hey, here's a low, here's a medium, here's a high, and we assume the high, $63 per ton in today's money out in 2040. And when you do that, you can see there's really not too much of a comparison. The natural gas is much, much lower cost. That's driven in large part because how many megawatts did I tell you we had to add of the other ones? It's 100 megawatts of natural gas. It was 400 megawatts of both wind and battery and 1,100 megawatts of solar. You're just buying a lot more stuff. Plus, the other thing you have, especially with wind and solar, not so much batteries, that's new, but with wind and solar, the prices now when you contract for those, much higher than they used to be. LES contracted for almost 300 megawatts of wind that all went online in 2015, very end of 2015, almost 2016. That was our last big foray into wind. The prices that we purchased wind at that point, about half the cost of what wind is today. And why is that? Everything from back then is about half the cost of what it is today, right? This stuff's not immune. So when you look at that, boy, the gas is looking like a pretty good option there, okay? There's another reason why that gas is so low cost though. This is an aerial of our existing Terry Bundy generating station. Natural gas plant sits out on the northeast side of town. If you look at that, I got a couple of little units stenciled in there in black. And there's an orange circle around them, all right? That would be these 2 we're talking about adding. They're exactly the same as these 3 that are above them. When we built that plant right after the year 2000, essentially it was finished. When we got that done, we thought there was going to be enough load growth that every 2 or 3 years we're going to have to add another unit. So we made provisions to add those 2 units. Then the load forecast changed, we didn't need them. But all those provisions just been sitting there the last 20 years. And I will tell you, you can't quite make it out, but right above that top unit that's kind of penciled in, there's what looks like a silver rectangle. Okay, that's a building. It's just a Morton Balin Chief building, all right? If you go inside that building, here's what it looks like. You got a driveway down the middle. And on this side, you have a whole bunch of auxiliary skids that support one of those combustion turbines. And on this side, you have a whole bunch of auxiliary skids that support the combustion turbine on this side. If you go in that further south building, what you'll see is all the skids on this side to support this combustion turbine, a drive lane, and then nothing but a whole bunch of stubbed up pipes and conduits just waiting for the skids. That first unit that goes in, all that stuff's the same. It's going to go in, you put the skids in, you connect them up. You have a lot of built-in infrastructure, okay? All the fuel piping is all underground and ready to go. All the transmission to hook them up, all ready to go. We can put these in cheaper than just about anybody ever could because a lot of the stuff we built 2 decades ago. Turned out back then we didn't need it, and now we're about to cash in. All right, so that's another reason this is so low cost. All right, so we looked at that, we showed it to the board, and at this point, you know, you're pretty certain that the natural gas units are the play. But you couldn't say that for certain because we've got that decarbonization goal that's out there for 2040. So what you have to do is you have to make sure if we add these 2 gas turbines, we're not going to mess up our flight path to reach that 2040 goal. If they're going to produce too much CO2 that they derail the goal today, well, then there's not much sense in putting them in. So to do that, we got to do a lot of long range forecasting. I'm going to warn you right now, if you haven't fallen asleep already, this is the time, okay? Lyle, tell your wife to catch you if you fall over. This isn't exactly rocket science, but there's a part of this that's going to get a little rocket science-y, okay? It's hard to talk about this without getting a little close to the weeds. Before we dive in, one thing you got to talk about is how are we going to measure success with our decarb goal? Well, remember, it's net zero. And if you go look up, you Google it, and you look up what's net zero mean, what the industry will tell you is net zero typically means you get rid of at least 90% of your CO2 emissions. You got to do whatever you got to do to get rid of those. And then you're going to be left with 10% or less. And that 10%, that's what you're trying to offset. Somebody's going to plant trees. They're going to actually put in the carbon vacuums and suck the carbon right out of the air. You're going to do something to offset the last 10%. So what you see up there is a chart that we've had for a long time, well before our goal was enacted in 2020. And it trends our CO2 emissions from a base year of 2010. Why 2010? Most of the industry uses 2010. And it shows the trend that we have to get to almost zero by 2040. And you can see we're doing pretty good. It bounces around a lot because how much the units run bounces around a lot, but we're trending where we should be. So what we're going to do when we run these long-term plans, we're not looking for the best plan. We're not looking for the lowest cost plan. We're just seeing, can we make sure that our CO2 is going to be below that magic 10% threshold by the time we get to 2040? All right, so here we go. I warned you up front. Okay, so the first thing we do is we map out, we're going to add the hydro, and then we're going to do this thing called paper capacity, which means I'm a little worried that I'm going to be short in SPP's eyes before I can get this gas built. So maybe if I know somebody who's got a little extra capacity, I can buy the rights to that for a few years. It is not a long-term hedge. No one will ever sell it to you long-term. We've got up there that we'd like to buy it in 2026 and we would surrender it in 2030. We did a big request for proposals, sent it out to the whole industry and said, we're looking in SPP to buy this paper capacity, which used to be done commonplace all the time. We basically got one person who's talking to us. So there's almost no one selling this paper capacity. And you can guess why. Everybody's getting hit by these same rules like we are. So either they're short or they're nervous that they could be short, so they're hanging on to it, all right? Then we're gonna add those 2 Aero CTs in 2030. That's the 2 we showed you at Terry Bundy. And then we're gonna add 2 more natural gas combustion turbines, but these we call frame CTs. They're bigger, cheaper, less efficient, all right? Why are we adding those? Well, because if you're gonna have a decarb goal and you're gonna talk about removing coal resources, you have to build up enough capacity to withstand the things you take away, all right? When I showed you, what if we add the hydro and we add the 2 aeroderivative combustion turbines, and that moves our need year all the way out to 2036. If we then take away our smallest coal resource, our need year back to 2026. Those 2 aeroderivatives and the hydro don't solve our problem forever. They just get our head above water. So if you want to remove coal, which we're going to do in these scenarios, you got to build up some capacity ahead of time. All right, so the first one we said, what if nuclear really starts to kick in? People start building a lot of nuclear again. Why do I say that? Well, because in all of SPP, a big area, there are 2 operating nuclear plants. So if we did this plan, we're 3 of 3, okay? So we said, you don't have to worry about the details because you know why? We made them up, all right? We said, well, we got to get rid of our 3 coal plants. So we just kind of arbitrarily picked what order those are going to go. And then we said, well, we've got large wind projects that are going to expire. That's Arbuckle down in Oklahoma. We have Buckeye and Prairie Breeze 2 in 2040. They're Kansas and Nebraska. And we said, let's just pretend that we're going to roll those over. If you don't roll them over, they're gone. You got to replace them with something else. But we're just going to roll them over. And then the big thing is we dropped in the nuclear. And here we threw that in 2036, all right? Then we looked at another one. We said, what if we did combined cycle with carbon capture and sequestration? Combined cycle means you take, and we already have one of these, just doesn't have the carbon capture and sequestration. You take 2 of these aeroderivative gas turbines, which are just kind of like your car. You put fuel in, you use them, and then what comes out the stack? Heat. With a combined cycle, you capture that heat and you run it through a steam turbine and you make more electricity without burning any more natural gas. Okay, it ups the efficiency. Those have been around a long time. What hasn't been around is the carbon capture and sequestration. This model is a 95% efficient. We're going to grab all the carbon before it hits the atmosphere and we're going to probably store it underground. All right. Combined cycle with carbon capture and sequestration. As of the end of last year, there were none of those in the world. None. Okay, so this is a very short list, shorter than the nuclear. Same thing though, retiring the coal, adding all this stuff in. We're just not adding nuclear, we're adding the combined cycle with CCS. And then finally, we looked at, well, what if we didn't retire the coal? What if we just retrofitted carbon capture and sequestration on those? Still 95% efficient. So we do all the other same things, we just put those in there instead. We don't have to worry about all the details. It's mind numbing, believe me. We're just going to look at the one because they're all pretty representative. All right. Now, when I call this the nuclear case, look at the top donut. It's not really nuclear. That's pretty much an even split between the nuclear we're adding, the gas we added to start with, and all the wind that we renewed the contracts. All right. You're almost third. So this is a pretty balanced portfolio that we're doing. This is a good one. Look at the bottom donut chart. That's what our entire portfolio looked like in 2040 if you actually enacted this entire plan. You're 39% renewables, 43% natural gas, and 13% nuclear. That's on a nameplate basis. If you just said, hey, I got all this capacity, who cares what SPP rates it? This is what I had to buy. So what is my expenditure to get in this game? All right. So that's pretty good. Okay, here's the rocket sciencey part. Remember, we're trying to see how our CO2 emissions did. So what we did is we took and expressed our 2040 CO2 emissions compared to 2010 as a percentage of 2010. And what's our magic number? 10% or less, right? Okay, but when we run a case, we don't run one case, we run 100 cases. On the vertical axis there, we're varying the natural gas price from $1 per MMBTU to $10 per MMBTU. Today, the going rate, about $3 per MMBTU. That's kind of where we live today. But gas has been extremely volatile over the last 2 decades and before that. I have no idea where the gas price is going to go. So we look at 10 different gas prices. Across the horizontal there, we have a regulated cost of CO2 emissions, a tax on carbon, $0 per ton, all the way to $90 per ton. That could be a lot of things. It could be EPA regulations that just equate to that much money. Or the easiest way to think about it, it's like the government said, we're going to put a carbon tax on all electricity, and every ton you emit of CO2, this is what you're going to pay. Okay. So as you can imagine, those 100 cases across that grid, the difference in the world from the upper left to the lower right is unfathomable. Okay. The world we live in is crazy different. But we model it all because we don't know what the future is going to hold. So when you look at that, it's a heat map. If you're exactly 10%, so your emissions in 2040 are 10% of what they were in 2010, which is what we're shooting for, the square is white. If it's less than 10%, it's blue. What's the first thing you notice? We did pretty good because there's a lot of blue squares on there, right? If you look at the upper right, I don't know if you can pick it out. The upper right's got a whole bunch of pink squares. They're not white. But if you go and look in the data, we range from 10 to 10.5%. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I call that a win. That's pretty good, right? Look at the upper two left squares. The pink one to the right, that's 12%. That's still pretty good. The one to the left, that's 20%. Now, when you look at that, you go, well, that's not very good because we were shooting for 10 and that's only 20%. I think that's bad. Well, you got to remember, on one hand, yes, we were shooting for 10%. But when there's a 20%, that means we removed 80% of the CO2. We didn't get 90%, but we still got 80%. So you look at that and you wonder, well, why is that one so bad? Well, that is the confluence of $1 natural gas and no carbon tax. So the model does what any of you would do. Well, if you're not going to tax me on the CO2 emissions and you're going to give away the fuel for free, I'm going to run those natural gas units like crazy. And that's why you see a little bit higher. Still, only 20%. We still got rid of 80%. So when you look at this, that's what sets it all home. Not only is the natural gas the cheapest option today in today's world, but under every future pretty much, except for one, we can get down to what our decarb goal is looking for. All right. And that was with more gas than what we needed. Because when we added those two extra units, we weren't at 100 megawatts. We were at 260. Okay. So what's our solution here? So we already talked about the battery. We talked about those two wind contracts we partnered with Google. We've got the 22 megawatts of hydro. That's already done. That contract's in the can because we had to have it done by April 1st. And then we're proposing to add these two units, total of 100 megawatts of natural gas. If you take everything on the screen there, which is all the generation, if the two units go forward, that we would have, that we'd say all this is done by 2030. That equates to 82% renewables and battery on a nameplate basis and 18% gas. If you look at our nameplate portfolio in 2030, when it's all done, this is with all of our existing resources, we'd be at 49% renewables, 30% natural gas, 21% coal. I don't know about you, but when you look at that plan, 82% renewables and battery, 18% natural gas, you know what that looks like to me? Exactly what you'd do if you're a utility and you had a net zero decarbonization goal, but you had some reliability issues you had to meet from your regulator, which is Southwest Power Pool. All right. So what we've done here is we recognize we have a reliability problem. We found the lowest cost way to meet it today, and we did all of it with an eye on that 2040 decarb goal to make sure what we do today isn't going to mess up our path to success in the future. At this point, I am going to hand off to Emily, and she's going to talk about the rate increases. What happened here? Yeah. This is awkward.
We had a plan, it didn't work.
You had it on. How can you not know where it went?
I know, I never did. What? Talk to him. One moment, please.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Oh. Okay, I'm going to talk just briefly and then we'll open it up for questions about what the financial impacts are of what Scott just touched on, and then specifically what the impacts are for customer rates. You know, the rules that Scott talked about that came out from SPP, while we are very heavily involved in SPP, LES staff are on a lot of the committees and so forth, the rules were not finalized until August. We were well into our budget, moving that on to our board approval process. And so, plus it takes a lot of time to kind of decipher the rules and figure out how you're going to respond to them. And so we've really spent a lot of time over the last several months working to understand them, how to respond to it, work with our board to educate them. And so we've been working aggressively on that, but it wasn't possible for us to include anything in the 2025 budget that would address really the resource additions that we're talking about today. So the cash outflows that were needed for the Terry Bundy generating station additions, if those were to be approved, and the Jeffrey hydroelectric additions were not included in the 2025 budget. So the cash payments that we're expecting just in 2025, this is subject to change. Literally just late last week, early this week, we've gotten kind of the initial contracts. We're just starting negotiations on some of the turbines. Literally just seeing them look to be as, so the cash flows for both of those things look to be as high as $25 million that we did not expect for this year. That is why we're proposing a mid-year rate increase of 4%. That would bring in, just in 2025, $6.5 million. So there's still a gap there. Of course, we do have some cash reserves. We have short-term financing facilities where we can close some of that gap, but this is a significant gap in our budget that we need to close. And so that is why we've decided to bring this forward at this time. So just to touch on a little bit, the most significant part of it really is the Terry Bundy generating station additions. And so this is a little financy, but just to kind of go through some details there, the cost estimates for that are about $180 million. That's the most significant capital infrastructure investment that we've made since the early 2000s when we were part owner of the Walter Scott Energy Center. And so it's been a really long time since we've done anything like this. We will need to issue long-term debt for this project. We need to get going on that really quickly. But the reason why we do that, though, is so that customers down the road in the future also will share in the cost of those plants because they are long-lived assets. With those assumptions, right now, the estimated rate impact for just the TBGS units is about 4.5%. You might ask, well, why are you not asking for 4.5%? Because we have just got these numbers and we think there's a little bit of finessing, perfecting we can do on the portfolio for the debt. We probably have some opportunities to do some tendering of some of our existing bonds where we might be able to get some savings. So we're going a little bit conservative. We're going with a 4% proposal right now to implement for effective July 1, but because we don't think it'll be less than that, we're pretty solid on this. But that's the biggest portion of what we're seeking here. So just to give you a little bit of history on where we've been with rate increases. So we've had a long history there, a few years with no rate increase, but the last few years we've had several. This would be 2 in 1 year. We don't take this lightly. We understand that this is significant for customers. One thing I can say is that we will be taking a very hard look at the 2026 budget and rates, knowing that the timing is not ideal for this, but it's important that we do it because we need to get going on the units. We need to get in the queue to be able to procure those units. Every month that we wait to get in the queue is a delay in getting them and also a cost increase for LES customers. And so we think it's important to get going on this. But we know that it's impactful to customers. And so we really will be looking hard at our the rest of the business as we prepare the budget, which that'll go before our board in September and for their action in October. This is a sampling of what the rate increases would be. This is a really boring slide because basically it's 4% for all the classes, but just kind of showing we target 95 to 105% cost of service. This is a slide we always show when we do rate changes. The one thing I'd highlight here is we didn't do any of our kind of cost of service adjustments, trying to really move any customers, do any kind of real, analysis on that because we're really doing this pretty quickly, actually. And so we're holding most classes at 4%. It makes the communications easier too when everybody's getting kind of the same rate adjustment. And so just to summarize, what we're seeking and taking forward to our board next Friday is a resolution that will include 2 things. It's an amendment to the 2025 budget for the full cost of the Terry Bundy additions, which is estimated to be $180 million. And it also revises the 2025 rate schedules to incorporate the 4% system-wide rate increase, and then instructs us to take that on to the city council. So again, not the ideal situation, not what we would prefer to do, but given the speed at which we need to act on this and kind of time being of the essence to get going on the Terry Bundy work, and also in the interest of being transparent with customers and the governing bodies, being the board and the city council, bringing forward the budget amendment, we felt it was important to also bring forward the rate increase that's necessary to fund that at the same time so that it was clear what that actually costs. So I think at this point, I'll open it up for questions for both of us, and now we have to share the mic, or you'll take, okay? Thank you. And I think we have online participants too, so. Okay. Yes. Yep. Boy, you're testing me now. I'll go back to those slides. A couple of those years, fortunately, we had a lot of payroll and benefits changes that we needed to make because we were experiencing a lot of high turnover kind of after COVID. I think a lot of companies were, I know that's a big portion of a couple of those too. Trying to remember, there's probably some power cost increases in
No,
there too.
don't look at
Don't
me.
worry.
I don't think it was
Usually you
me.
guys are the problem, but I actually think it wasn't those years, so that's some of it.
So everybody online can hear you.
A second question, getting back to the power generation stuff. Is there a technical explanation as to why the combined cycle carbon capture hasn't been a viable alternative? Because my experience or my understanding of that is the combined cycle is a very efficient way of burning natural gas. And I guess, surprised to hear that they haven't come up with a carbon capture technique for that as well.
You hit it. It's the carbon capture and sequestration part, right? So first you got to crack the nut on the carbon capture. As I mentioned, nobody's done it with a combined cycle. There's only been 4 coal plants in the world that have done it, 2 that are retrofits and 2 that are new. None of those come anywhere close to sniffing 95% effective. All right. But that's just, okay, so let's say you put that in and you're one of the few people that ever do it and it works. Well, now you've captured all this carbon. Okay, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Well, normally they're putting it underground, but that only works in certain geological areas. So they need pipelines and stuff to take it. Well, none of that infrastructure exists yet.
Right.
So that's really, it's the technological part because it hasn't been done much, and things that haven't been done much cost a lot. It's not cheap.
Okay.
And then just because you do it, you still got to have partners. So until the infrastructure gets put in to handle it, that kind of is holding it back too. Good question.
All right, thank you.
And for those online, if you have a question, just raise your hand using the raise hand feature at the top. Or you can put your question in the chat. And my colleague Sally is going to let us know if any of those hands are raised or any of those questions come in via chat. Anybody else have a question? Lyle's wife.
Not a question, but a comment. I just want to tell you that we feel very fortunate in Lincoln, and the reason we're here tonight is because LES is one of those companies that is very transparent and puts the information out so that if you want to know what it is, it's there. The problem is that I believe 98% of the people of Lincoln don't care until their rate changes. They don't look at it up front. They don't go to any of the meetings. There's no articles that help in the paper that solve it for them or give them information. It doesn't matter to them until their rate changes, and then they're ticked. And that's unfortunate because I think with a company like LES, what I'm most proud of, and it has nothing to do with being here tonight, it has everything to do with the fact that the information is there for us. You put it out, you have all these meetings. I know you've had other meetings. I've been keeping track. It's like 3 or 4 people show up. 2 people show up. There's more employees there than there is general public. And that's the sad thing is nobody recognizes the amount of information that you're putting out to be transparent until, like I said, it hits them in the pocket and, oh, well, now it's too late. And so you get all the complaints. I think, I'm not sure why, but Lincoln likes to pay taxes, as is evident by the fact that we put it on the ballot and we all vote for yes. And yet when you come and share that there's going to need to be increases, there will be a fight. I know people will say, well, every time they raise their rates, because they haven't taken the time to come listen to why those things have to happen. We try to do what's best for our grandkids in the future. I do financial planning so that my grandkids are taken care of. And I thank you guys for planning so that my grandchildren will be taken care of. But I feel bad for you that with all the efforts you make, most people don't come and listen. They don't pick it up. I even feel that it's that way with our legislature. And I don't know about your board. I won't speak to them. But I think it's sad that nobody pulls the information that I know is out there because I've seen it. I see it posted all the time. And yet, so I thank you for this. And I'm sorry that it's not as easy as it should be when you put all the figures out there and given the information you have, you've put it out there for us to have. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that was directed to you. So thank you for the feedback. We appreciate it. Look, we try to get everything out there, make sure people have the ability and the opportunity to look at it if they have time. I know the time is the critical part. We do all this. We love to share with everybody. I got to be honest with you. My wireless bill and my fiber bill, I don't pay attention to them either until they raise my bill. And it's because you only have so much time. So we do get that, but we do really appreciate you folks that come out tonight.
Any other questions? Okay, in the back.
Are you going to ask a question or are you going to tell us how great we are? Either one. We'll take both.
Sorry, I'll make it a question. My apologies. I'm not quite as complimentary. Out of curiosity, recognizing, and I think you're aware of the financial impact this might be having, especially on some of our lowest income residents in the city of Lincoln, is there already conversations into how to support potentially people who aren't able to pay those bills, and even potentially efforts to target where we know medium income and things along those lines are lower within the community to make sure they're aware of any resources that might be available or other things along those lines?
So I know we have a lot of programs that we do. We have an energy assistance program that we put a lot of contributions to that are as a board resolution that we've adopted. So a portion of every dollar that we receive goes towards that. I think, I don't know if Lisa wants to speak to anything else that we had. There's nothing specific that we've decided as it relates to this because literally we worked on this yesterday. So there may be more to come, but I think we're very active in that regard, just on a routine basis anyway. So, but we are cognizant of that and mindful of it and know that it's not easy. And there isn't a lot of warning about this rate increase, not as much as there normally is. And it's not our preferred method for how we would do a rate increase typically, but we're trying to balance what's best for the community. And part of that also is not layering this on top of what might be a rate increase that's required January 1st also, and kind of stepping it in over time, which tends to be a little bit easier too. So we understand.
Okay, it looks like we have a question online. Okay. Yep. Okay, Ken, you just unmute yourself and you're ready to go. Or you could put your question in chat if needed. Doesn't look like he's getting his mic unmuted. I think Ken just wanted to say thank you for your hard work, your ongoing efforts here. Yeah. Anyone else have a question for Scott or Emily? Okay. Ken, our IT person is going to try this again. All right, try unmuting again, Ken. why they do that. Anybody else have a question? Got a couple others in the room. Yep.
Ken said he had a question about combining resources like wind and battery storage. Is there anything you'd like to mention about that, or would you like me to have him enter his exact question?
No, I think I probably got it. This come up before. So when I showed that chart and we talked about the cost, right? And we showed the natural gas and then we had the wind and then the battery and the solar kind of in that order from bottom to top. Questions come up because what we modeled is, well, what if you put in 2 natural gas turbines or you put in 400 megawatts of wind or 400 megawatts of battery or 1100 megawatts of solar? And one of the questions we've gotten, and we're actually going to take this to the board with a little slide a week from Friday, has been, well, but what if you combine not 400 megawatts of wind, but maybe 200 megawatts of wind and 200 megawatts of battery? I don't know how likely is it that we can go backwards and actually get that far. Hang on a second. Not that way. This is when all the animations become quite obvious. Right there, that's that cost chart. So what we've told the board previously is if you take that, and what Ken's question I think is, well, what if I take part of the green bar and part of the blue bar or part of the orange bar and I combine them? Can I get down to where those 2 combustion turbines are, the yellow? And if you look at that green bar, the wind, that's 400 megawatts and the blue bar is 400 megawatts of battery. So if you want to be the equivalent of the yellow, the cheapest thing you could do there using the other 3 would be to take half the wind and half the battery and stack them up. And when you do that, you can tell in your mind's eye, you can't get anywhere close to where that yellow is at the bottom, right? And so then you ask questions about, well, what if I only did one of the combustion turbines? And then I added to it half of the wind or half of the battery. Well, you can also, again, take a look at that and in your mind's eye tell, yeah, we just can't get down there. That doesn't mean these costs are always going to be that way. Doesn't mean it's always going to be the same. Doesn't mean the SPP rules are going to shake out the same way. But the way they do today in our current predicament, those 2 natural gas turbines represent the lowest cost option no matter how you shuffle the deck. I think that's what Ken was probably asking.
Okay. Any other questions for Scott or Emily?
All right. Would increased energy efficiency and reductions in energy consumption have any impact on minimizing upgrades to the Terry Bundy generating station or reduce the anticipated rate increase?
Are you just tapping out on me or what? Okay, I'll go, yeah. All right, so would energy efficiency, basically demand side management, things we could do on the customer side of the meter to lower their load, would that potentially offset the need for some of this? And yeah, if you could do a lot more of that, then maybe you don't need 2 combustion turbines. Maybe you only need 1 combustion turbine. The catch we have is we already do quite a bit of that. We have what is called our sustainable energy program where we partner with customers. So if somebody's going to say, let's put in a new air conditioner, we say, how about we give you a little money and you put in a more efficient air conditioner? It's kind of win-win. You get lower utility bills. What do we get in return? Well, we get lower demand in the summer when we're looking at what our peak might be. Well, so we do that. That actually, we were just looking at the numbers today, Mark Skolnick and I think, Mark, you tell me if I get these wrong. When you do all that for our large business customers, we reduce about 27 megawatts right now. If you look at our residential customers with just that program, we reduce about 4 megawatts. So that's about 31 megawatts right there. Then we have what we call our peak rewards program. Real quick show of hands. Anybody on the peak rewards program? Okay. Thank you. Next time I'll say not LES staff. Thank you, Mark, for letting us. Mark let us know that he's on his own program. That's good. So with peak reward, a lot of you are on it. We take your smart thermostat and in the summer on what we might be a peak day, a couple hours before we think we're going to hit the peak, we lower your temperature set point, pre-cool your house so that hopefully over the next couple hours when we hit the peak, your air conditioner's not running, all right? We got a lot of people on that program. That sheds about another 5 megawatts. So you take the 27 for the large business community for energy efficiency, the 4 for energy efficiency with residential, the 5 for peak rewards, you're up to like 36 megawatts, I think, if I was doing that right. Well, one of those aeroderivative combustion turbines, they're 50 megawatts when you buy them, but what SPP gives you credit for is 40. So when people say, if you did enough energy efficiency and demand side management, could you offset the need for one of those? Absolutely you could, because if we weren't doing the programs we were doing today, we'd need 3, not 2. So we've made big use of it already to date. We're going to try to make use of it in the future and continue to grow that, but it's already been very successful. Do you want to speak to the rates part? No, you
I
don't?
think you've
Okay.
covered it. Well,
All
I
right.
mean, it would,
It would be cheaper.
right.
Okay, I'll ask again. Any other questions in the room or online? One more question.
All right. When you make these predictions, there's got to be some sort of margin of error around that, right? I mean, are we looking at what you think the average or the most likely or the, if we get lucky, it'll be this number? Do we have a sense of that?
So we have a sense they're probably not very good, all right? Because you have to put tons of assumptions together, all right? We do the best we can with every single assumption, but you're stacking assumptions upon assumptions upon assumptions. That's the big reason we do that long range planning, that we're looking at that wider range of gas prices and that wider range of CO2 prices. Not only does it test those 2 scenarios, but you're changing a lot of the inputs. So, maybe it wasn't the scenario you thought it would be, but you've kind of pushed all those numbers around. There's no doubt you're trying to guess a long way into the future. We do the best way we can, but that's why we kind of try to cover a really broad range. Good question.
Okay. I think we're out of questions.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for coming out or attending online. We appreciate it. This information will be available at les.com, the taped recording, as well as the slide deck. Thank you.